Hello, and thank you for your interest in improving your collaboration through dental photography. I want to quickly introduce myself and the video. My name is Ryan McKee. I am the lab manager and photographer here at McTech Dental Lab in Billings, Montana. I served 5 years in the 82nd Airborne Infantry. I did 2 combat tours, after which I came back home. I went to MSU here in Billings, got my double degree in business for marketing and management, after which I started working here. Now, even though I officially only started in 2017, I've actually been around this my whole life and around this company my whole life. My father is the founder and the owner and the lead ceramist here at McTech Dental Lab. I have to mention really first that this is my first recording of my very first presentation, so I say and I kind of trail off here and there. Please have some grace for a first timer. It was taken at the 2026 Wyoming Dental Association meeting. A couple of doctors decided that my expertise in this area over the years was worthy of putting the presentation together. So using my own photos over the years, my own cases and stuff, I worked hard and created these slides. I'll go over in the video why I decided to specialize in this area, but I do want to say I'm totally self-taught, and everything is kind of based off of real life cases. I'm still learning, and if this content goes well, I plan on doing more. So if you find this information helpful, please drop a like and subscribe and leave a comment. If you have any questions, you can always contact me at the lab. Thank you. Now, this case was just another case. It fell on our lap. This is your typical rural kind of patient. Didn't really ask for a perfect match. But we had the information. He came in for a custom shade. I took the pictures, and my technicians can make it happen, so we did. We're actually really proud of that simply because, yeah, it's not the perfect Hollywood teeth, but it's a real challenge to match that. And even if, he doesn't have the same expectations, the patient himself, his family, his wife, and everybody else, I'm sure appreciated the fact that it's not a rainbow that he's putting in his mouth, So I do want to read from this quote. This is from Will Mario. This really kind of forms the basis of why I make decisions whenever it comes to photography or anything else. So as we in men of medicine grow in our learning, we more justly appreciate our dependence upon each other. The sum total of medical knowledge is now so great and widespreading that it would be futile for any one man to assume that he has even a working knowledge of any large part of the whole. The very necessities of the case are driving practitioners into cooperation. The best interest of the patient is the only interest to be considered, and in order that the sick may have the benefit of advancing knowledge, a union of forces is necessary. So, collaboration is important, and this is actually the opening line to a Ken Burns documentary, which is an amazing documentary. If you haven't seen it before, I highly encourage you to. It tells the story of the Mayo Clinic and how it all started and everything else. He was one of the first multidisciplinary hospitals to kind of come up. He was there for all of the rise of different kinds of disciplines of medicine, and his philosophy of bringing in other players that could bring in value that he couldn't necessarily have, the specialization. He kind of pioneered that. And I really do think that when we consider what are our goals going to be, how much are we distancing our decisions from the patient? Now, as a dental lab, anybody who's ever done any kind of dental lab training knows what the PTC is, which I watched on VHS when I was much younger, and they mentioned never forget that this is a patient, not just a number on a case pan, and that is an easy thing to do. And so photography is one of the ways in which we kind of bridge that gap between ourselves and the patient. Now, the purpose of photography in dentistry is severalfold. Obviously, there's the collaboration end of things. And I kind of put this in order of what I feel like is kind of important, at least from dental lab's perspective. So the number one purpose for dental photography is for collaboration. And you can't really critique yourself on praise alone. So, critiquing and then, of course, documentation. It's good to have good records. And then being able to educate yourself and others is useful too. Now, on the last of all of these is, of course, marketing. And what we're going to find out is that we can narrow down one of these purposes for any given photo, and it is very tough for it to serve any other purpose as well. And so learning how to take good, high-quality images can fulfill all five every single time. So my purpose as a dental photographer is to benefit the patient by, and I like putting that by at the end there because it kind of goes back to William Worrell Mayo there. Taking photos that inform, inspire, and elevate the case outcomes of my technicians, my doctors, and any other member of the restorative team to include the patient. I know for a fact that since I've started taking photos, every one of my technicians has been able to up their game simply because they can see the results. So the goal of this lecture is to elevate the understanding of a clinically learned audience by passing on to them what I have learned through the necessities of real life cases. Okay, so what does a clinically learned audience mean? It means at the end of the day, I'm going to try to make things as simple as possible, but at some point I'm going to have to assume you're all no dummies, okay? So it is as simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. That's Leonardo da Vinci, right? And of course, a famous quote, not every quote you copy and paste from the internet is true, as Abraham Lincoln. Right. So to elevate the understanding, I'm not handing you a checklist. If you guys wanted to have a checklist on what to do, you can go online, you can find that. And you'll find several contradicting checklists. And some of them from people who are just more or less trying to sell a kit with the word dental in front of it, right? Instead, what I'm doing is I'm going to teach you some fundamental concepts necessary to practice dental photography the way that you practice any aspect of dental. So at that point, you can make your own checklist. Now, I do provide a list and a recap of things that you guys can absolutely take pictures of. So what I have learned through the necessities of real life cases, so this is where I qualify what makes me worthy of standing up here and talking about dental photography. Well, I don't have to know everything about every photography concept and every piece of photography technology, past and present. I can only speak to the experiences that I have, the equipment that I have, and the scope of the research that required me to reach the goals of my lab. So I don't have to know everything, but I know that results speak for themselves. And these are the photos I took, and this is the result that we got. And that's what qualifies me, is we do this all the time. We do a dozen custom shades every week, and we can get really good results. Now, another disclosure, I talk about Lightroom a lot. Now, Lightroom is a software from Adobe. It's a piece of software that you can take raw images into, and you can process them, and then it comes out again. It's a process to learn, but it's very efficient once you do learn it. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about how to do that. Simply because we have a lot of other things to cover. So as you hear me bring things up, that is a thing that you're going to have to either go on another resource to find, or you can find a lab that knows how to use these kinds of images and just send them the raw data as well. And you can ask your lab if they accept raw images, and they'll let you know how to submit them. So this little icon right here, I am torn between giving you enough information that you can be successful at taking good images and simplifying things. So as I summarize these slides, sometimes they're going to have a lot more information on them than what I'm giving you. So I have a little icon on there to let you know, hey, this is either important that you want to remember, or you can take a picture because there's some things on here that has more of the why I believe this. So the key takeaway, no matter what, I don't want to intimidate anybody into taking photography. I don't want you thinking if you send a bad picture to my lab that we're going to have these big judgments of you, and honestly don't. If we just get pictures, like, it would be a huge change. So take pictures. It doesn't matter where you're at right now. It doesn't matter if it's with your phone. Understand what the limits of those kinds of pictures are, so that you don't have unrealistic expectations for the results, but don't keep them to yourself. So practice dental photography the way that you practice anything in dentistry, okay? It's a practice. You do it over and over again, and you get better each time. And the worst photos are always the ones you don't take or the ones you don't send. All right, so we're going to get into the fundamentals. We have two guiding principles that I'm going to use throughout this slide, and you're going to see this again and again. Every decision that I make, every recommendation that I have is in line with one of these principles. Because the first one is consistency. And what I mean by that is that we want to control for as many variables as possible. We want to make sure that our environment is knowable, so that we can repeat things over and over again, especially when you're doing stuff like befores and afters, when you're trying to communicate shade. Understanding how your environment impacts your photography is pretty important. And the next one is, I keep pointing in the wrong direction, true to life. So by true to life, I mean, we don't want to be misled as to what a shade is. We don't want to be misled as to what the shape of the crown is and the length and everything else. So having something that's true to life, especially when it comes to smile design photos and stuff like that, it's just rather important. Now these are just, these two rules, these two guiding principles, and in this way we've simplified the needs, what we need. We just need two things to be satisfying. That also lets us know how much do we need to understand complex concepts in photography, and how many concepts can we simply ignore, okay? Again, every recommendation is built from these rules, and I'm not trying to pretend like it's gonna be super simple and fast and easy and your first photos is gonna be amazing. I don't sell cameras, I don't sell equipment, I sell results. And I know that like the right photos can get those results. So I want to talk about light. Light reveals. Oftentimes we try to strike some kind of a balance between one setting or another and try to get all of the information in one shot. And what I'm trying to show you here is that, like, in some cases that's not possible. Light will reveal some aspects of an object and it will hide others. So if you look on the far right, or left, on the far left over there, and that's backlit, you can clearly tell which of these are 3/4 veneers and which one's a crown. And the backlight reveals that. And if you go to the next one, the front lit, now you can see all of the contours and the details in the front that you could not see before. And so if I'm trying to see both, what I end up with backlit and front lit is I end up with a little less of each. And so this kind of exemplifies how sometimes compromising with your settings, trying to do too much with one photo, can actually render less than desired results. So sometimes it's just a matter of take another photo with different settings or different lighting. Now, balancing exposure. So if anybody's ever taken a photography class, if anybody's ever looked at these three settings, these look pretty familiar. There is a exchange between taking in more light and meeting a certain kind of goal of accuracy and sharp imaging. Okay, so throughout this discussion of these three fundamental settings, what we're going to find out is that we are actually taking in very little light. We can be in a fully lit room and the camera is going to show a very underexposed image. Okay, so what is exposure? Exposure is simply, is this bright enough to give me all the details I need and be lifelike to what I'm seeing? And is it dark enough that it's not washing everything out? Okay, so that's what correct exposure really is. Now, there is no, what I've learned is that while you can get some techniques that involve getting the correct exposure, at the end of the day, brightness comes and goes. And even when you have those instruments, it's really just a baseline. You can go up and down slightly, but at the end of the day, that's underexposed. There's a lot that I can't see and I can't make out over there. And this is washed out. There's a ton that I can't make out here. So aperture. So what's interesting is this is Becky, by the way, right? I got kind of a candid shot of her, so I decided, well, that's a really cool shot of the eye. And I thought that it really spoke to aperture because aperture is actually a biological function. The pupils in our irises are hypersensitive and they're extremely fast when they react to different levels of light. So when they see something that is too bright, then of course they contract. When they see something that is too dim, then of course they expand. But it's not just the light that they're reacting to. I mean, you can go on to some David Attenborough movie, and you'll see that the eyes of a predator are very pinpoint. The eyes of the prey are very wide. And that speaks to just what are we trying to focus on. So when it comes to things like that, what we're really looking at is depth of field. The image is going to come in regardless of the size of the hole, but what is going to be focused on is what that aperture is going to be set at. So for the purposes of clinical photography, blur is not welcome at all. So we want to get rid of all of the blur. But as I'll go over, there's kind of an exchange on that. Now this is my son. We're at a railroad track, and this kind of shows you what the aperture is. Now, the size of the hole exists in the lens, in case you didn't know. Okay, the lens is where it is. So I went ahead and opened up my lens all the way on the right, and then I kind of closed it as much as I could on the left. When you open things up all the way on the right, what you end up with, especially like right here is in the foreground, you have nice sharp detail, but then everything behind it is faded out. That's called bokeh. And it has that fancy name because it's an artistic effect. When you have it constricted like this, then you have the entire field all the way to the horizon in sharp detail. Now that interplay does work itself on an arch. I just showed you a landscape, but it doesn't matter how far away it is. The point is that even if all you have is a few millimeters, like an arch's worth of millimeters in front of you, that still is the frame. And if we look at our recommended setting up here, we can see that the entire arch is totally in focus. Whereas when we come down here, yes, we have good focus right here, but as we move out, the focus quickly is lost. And the reason why that's important is because if we're trying to measure things like embrasures, if we're trying to measure length and width of teeth, we're trying to critique ourselves, or we're trying to plan ahead, even the patient's trying to communicate what they want, what they have in their head, you can't do so if things are out of focus like that. Hold on now. All right. Now, in making that slide, I made a discovery. And I went down a rabbit hole and I discovered something. So there's an exchange between focus. When we have an aperture wide open and our depth of field is very narrow, yes, everything else is out of focus. But what is in focus is in much more focus. So we have extremely sharp edges. And one of the reasons why we needed to have the lights down so low is because it's difficult to really kind of see this slide particularly. But what I have right here is extremely sharp edge right here, and then it quickly fades as it goes. And that's with the f-stop, the aperture of 2.8. And when we come up here, we have the entire arch in a generally better focus. But all of it is generally less than what we have here. So there is a little bit of an exchange. If you're ever wondering why is it recommended that we have f-stop 22 and not f-stop 32? Well, it's because 32 won't have the sharpness necessary across the arch, and 22 is more than suffice. So a lot of times it's about striking these kinds of balances. So this is just another little, I like to give tons of examples and ways of illustrating things. That way you can really kind of fully grasp these concepts. These fundamentals are important. When you understand these, it answers so many other questions that you think are more advanced. And it becomes so obvious. So again, the higher the aperture, the smaller the hole, the less the light, the sharper the image. The lower the aperture, the more the light, the larger the hole, and the more bokeh that we have, the more blur that we have. And in our industry, we want things to be out of balance. Relatively, we want the entire thing in focus. So f22 is what's recommended. The next of these three pillars of exposure is going to be shutter speed, okay? So shutter speed is the amount of time that the camera's sensor is exposed to light, and it's given as a ratio per second. And what this effect has is it can freeze an image in place, or it can give it some motion blur, which conveys and communicates the motion that you're seeing. So an example of that would be like waterfalls, a night sky as it's moving across, and traffic lights as it's going. Those are all those slow shutter speeds. It's drinking in a lot of light, and if the light is moving, essentially you're painting light onto the sensor. All right. And then a fast shutter speed would be what you'd see in like peak athletic moments where you're trying to capture someone with their fingertips right on the ball or something, right? And so water droplets is another good example. And then here we're casting some gold. So I went and took a picture of that. Those where things are frozen. And I showed, yeah, you can show that this milling machine is working. So I have a fun little thing. I like to have my son up here just because, you know, he's at an age that's cute. Actually, this is when he was much younger. There's my dad, his grandpa. He's throwing him up in the air, and I caught him in motion, right? And what's great about fast shutter speed is it can actually reveal details that you didn't even know were there. So you get a long string of spit right here. And then I wonder if he would have his mouth open if he knew that was there, right? And then, of course, you know, artistically, you can convey how hard it is to hold the attention of a toddler. So, all right. So ISO. ISO is an acronym. It's like International Standard of Measurements or something like that. It means nothing about what it means, if that makes sense. Essentially, ISO used to be a thing that you bought on the film. It was this sensitive. The film is this sensitive, and there was a couple of different names for it, and then at some point they all kind of combined to say, like, well, let's just have one measurement for how sensitive the film is. All right, so that's what ISO means. And in digital photography, that's one of the biggest revolutions of digital photography, is now you have a whole new slew of kinds of automations because you can pick how sensitive you want your film to be. You don't have to trade it out. You don't have to think about that factor anymore. And so ISO is the sensitivity of your digital sensor, okay? In fact, if you take your ISO all the way down, it's called base ISO. And that's where we operate. Oh man, I got to get used to this. So what happens when we have a high ISO versus a high ISO? First of all, ISO is one of those things that you exclusively use because there's not enough light. In fact, the recording that I'm doing of myself here, I know for a fact that it's going to be a little bit grainy. And we're going to have to do some mock-up for that. But that's because there's low light. When you don't want to compromise your shutter speed, because it needs to be at that shutter speed, you don't want to compromise your aperture because that's the focus that you need. Well, that's when ISO comes into play. All right, but the result is this. What we have here is we have nice, clear, and crisp details. And over here, we have noise. It's essentially static, okay? It brings in more light, but then you end up with more anomalies. So for our purposes, this is not true to life. It's not consistent because this does affect our ability to do things like white balance later on, to do comparative shade analysis. And so we want to have a higher ISO. And so I've got a couple more illustrations just like before that kind of outline that. Again, this is a key concept. Try to drink this in and really kind of understand it, okay? The lower the ISO, the less noise there is and the less light there is. So putting all of this together, these three concepts, we have created an artificial low light situation. And so we have to have a flash. And flash photography and macro photography, which is the dental photography, I would argue is mostly macro photography, then it requires a lot of light. And that's going to come from your flash. And I have a couple examples of it and we'll get to there. So obviously the other factor when it comes to exposure is distance, and that's implied. That's not difficult to understand. If you're far away from an object, especially if the light source is moving with you, then you're going to have less light reaching your camera. If you're closer, it's going to be brighter, and that's kind of what this reveals. This is a little tiny Rick here and little zirconia Rick. Well, when you're close, obviously you can't make out who he is, but this is how bright things are. Everything else is the same. It was a quick depiction of it. So let's talk about the color of light. Actually, it's called the temperature of light. So color isn't real. Purple is the least real of all the colors. The sun is not yellow. In space, it's white. So have fun with those rabbit holes. Understanding color can be frustrating because so much is built upon the perception of things. Okay? We build color in our brains. That's why purple isn't real, because it's not green. That's what our brain defines as purple, is not green. We don't have the color rods. There's no color rods. There's nothing on the spectrum that's actually purple. It's an interesting rabbit hole to go down. So color is a perceptual construct that results from the interplay between the wavelengths present within the light introduced and the reflectance properties of the object illuminated. So that is to say that the grass is not green. That is, it reflects green color when full spectrum daylight is introduced. If we introduce UV light, just UV light, then now the grass is blue. So what is color really when it comes down to that? Well, what we're actually concerned with isn't color at all. It's the reflectance property of an object. Okay, so this is a good example of how unreliable light can be. Everything in dentistry is based upon, this is the golden standard, the daylight, right? And daylight changes every day, all the time, every minute, every second. So this is a good example of that. This is my son, again, caught himself a couple of little bluegills, right? We're sitting there at Lake Elmo fishing, and I love bluegills because you can just throw them right back. No, we can't eat this one, buddy. And so these two images were taken just less than an hour from one another. And you can see over here, the shadow's getting kind of long, and it was 6:52 p.m. And then less than 40 minutes later, 7:31, he caught another one. And he either received a huge dose of sunburn or he's now jaundiced. But basically what happens is that the sun has reached what's called golden hour. Golden hour is a celebrated time of the day when it comes to portrait photographers, because the light is much softer and it's much easier to deal with, and it's almost impossible to take a bad picture. But for our purposes, that means that depending on the time of day, you can't really depend on daylight to give you an accurate reading of color and a translation of color for teeth, right? So not only does it change throughout the day, and the reason why it changes is because it filters through the atmosphere. I'll go ahead and give this to you. So the atmosphere is what changes the color of the sun. It's white. It's made yellow because it goes through our atmosphere. Well, on sunrise and on sundown, it goes through more atmosphere than at high noon. And so as it goes through less and less atmosphere, it becomes less and less yellow. And then as it goes back again during sunset, it goes back to more and more yellow again. So it's because it's filtering through the atmosphere. The light of the sun is full spectrum and perfectly white, but how do we obtain this? In fact, when you look at the Kelvin scale, so now this Kelvin scale here is one of the things that actually tells us what is a light. When you break things down into wavelengths, it becomes necessary to be like, well, how do we land one kind of light to differentiate from another? So differentiating it by wavelengths, we end up with the Kelvin scale. The Kelvin scale usually operates like with your fluorescent lights, probably fluorescent. They're going to be around 38K, a tungsten overhead lamp that you have at an operatory, which I don't think that's a thing anymore, is it? They operate at a much even warmer temperature. And our flashes and daylight is over here at 55, but then when it's cloudy out, it's 6,500. And when it's shady, then it's 7,500. So this shows that, well, full spectrum light is capable of more change. So why is it the standard that we use to say, well, what's the correct exposure? What's the correct color of light? Well, that's because of reflectance. We don't care about the light necessarily nearly as much as getting the properties of what the reflectant object is. And light will change. It will change as it's being reflected. Light's a different color during the winter than it is during the summer because of the way it bounces off of snow. So understanding that, like, what we don't need to understand is every wavelength of light. This was one of my very first before and after photos. This was, she was an assistant for another doctor. She had fluorosis. It was a tough match. She loved her polka dot teeth, and she didn't want to change that. And we were happy to accommodate. So I did some before photos. Now this was the after image, and I ran into a problem with this. Now you can tell by my settings that I'm not using a flash. I'm just using the ambient light around me. Okay? And I have her sitting next to a window. So daylight from the window is coming in this direction, and we have this color. Overhead fluorescent lights are coming from this direction, and we have that color. There is no setting that I can use that's going to account for two different temperatures. So that's why we can't use ambient light for our photography. If we want to know what color is, if that's the real skin tone, is that the real color of the teeth? And why is this important at all? Why do we need to nail this down for a portrait? Why is it that like a before and after is so font and important? Because you can see right here all kinds of differences. I think they're pretty good photos. You can see she's got great eyes. The last thing that you're going to notice is the fact that she's got a yellow tooth there. And eliminating distractions from the differences is what a before and after is. If you really want to communicate to a patient the difference that teeth can make in their life from full mouth reconstructions, adding a couple of millimeters, then you need to have good before and afters where they're not looking at the fact that, well, they look jaundiced in this picture and they look like they're sunburned in that picture. And they're not noticing like, oh, well, look at how crazy that detail is, this detail is. They 100% only see what the effects of good dentistry can do to a face. So this is where our concept of consistency and true to life guiding principles kind of come in. So with all this frustration about, well, what is color, what is color, what is color, what kind of light do I control and this and that, all of that can be kind of done if we understand what we need is a reference. We need to have an object in the frame with a known value. And the best value would be one that reflects all of the spectrums of light completely evenly. That's called gray. If there's any painters in here, you'll know that mixing gray is the most difficult color that there is to mix, because being able to evenly distribute out all of the spectrum of light is next to impossible. But you know, with modern manufacturing, we've figured out we have these things called gray cards, okay? And in dentistry, there's even some very specific kinds of gray cards that we can use, and I'll talk about them here in a moment. So the intrinsic property of teeth that we are concerned with in dentistry is reflectance, okay? And that's what I want you to walk away with when it comes to this fundamental, okay? And with that, the fundamentals are covered. We've talked about aperture, shutter speed, ISO, and we've talked about distance and then the color of light or the temperature of light. These things will help us to make all these other decisions. These are the basis for the next critical equipment. Because we understand these things, the kind of equipment that we need becomes more obvious. First thing we need, maybe not the first thing, definitely what we need is a white balance card. Now, there's a couple of different white balance cards on the market. Now, what a white, I call it white balance reference card because that's the actual technical term for it. It can be understood as neutralizing all of the color biases. Again, it's this middle gray that reflects the entire spectrum evenly. The most surefire way to have true to life and consistent images every single time, to where that patient is here today and we're starting the case and we're going to take the photos and we're going to show this transformation throughout, and knowing that we're going to show exactly what the color change was for this patient. We're going to show them whether it's whitening, whether it's ortho or anything like that. Then the most surefire way to get color correct is with a card. And it's not as difficult to use as people assume. Now, there is a way of doing it in the camera. I don't recommend it, not for our purposes. That's really good if you have a lot of automations going on, if you're shooting in like a stadium or you're trying to balance all kinds of different colors of light. But the fact is, we have a way of repeating it every single time. And so as long as we can have a card, then we can get a very consistent result. Now, the two brands that I'm talking about here, one's called Matisse and one is called eLab. These are high-end shade mapping, shade matching digital formats. That one's based in Europe, and I think the other one's based in Japan. And I'm very curious about this because it does help technicians to develop a recipe for color. And this has even been used with Cerix and stuff like that to pretty much circumvent a whole lot of what we've been dealing with for a long time. Essentially, this is a way of doing digital custom shades. Now, it does require you to have a color-corrected model to sit on top of it. And so there's still some difficulties with this that technology still has yet to solve, but I am keeping an eye on this. I'm very interested in it. In the meantime, I just use these as grade reference cards. Okay, you won't find the instructions on how I use these on these guys' websites, because what they want you to do is they want you to take these shots with the settings that I'm describing and with everything else that I'm describing. Then they want you to send it to their website, and then they use AI to do a lot of the stuff for you. For our purposes, we can do it just by ourselves. Space. So we recently moved into my lab, and it was a new lab. One of the things that I gave us was a dedicated shade-taking space, and I doubled it as a photography space as well. It's a big investment, but I'll tell you, it really pays off. When you have the space, then you can set things up to be repeatable. And I know that, like, we are all small business owners as well as whatever else we are. I'm also a plumber, a marketer, electrician. It goes on, but I know that space is money. And so when someone tells you you need to have a dedicated space, that's a big investment. But I do find that it's worth it, especially with your ability to communicate to a lab. And I'll make that case as we go as well. The lens. So that is the dental photographer's lens. There is maybe 2 others on the market, but that's what it is. What we're looking for, in no uncertain terms, is a prime lens, a true macro lens with a fixed focal length, with a 1-to-1 ratio. These are all the things that make this lens have the least amount of distortion of any other lens out there, which is important for our purposes. We really want to know, does that embrasure really go up that far? Is that tooth as white as it looks? Can I compare this to that? And none of that is possible when you have a vast amount of distortion happening. Go ahead and take a picture because I talk about it at length here. And I talk about it at length here as well. Now, you could think that, like, well, this is a macro lens. It's made for macro and close-up stuff. Actually, that's not true. This is a celebrated portrait lens. You do have to stand a little farther back. But if you follow the recommendations that I give later, you can mitigate that as well. I have a crop sensor, for example, and I'll talk about how that's really bitten me in the... All right. So here is an example of what that distortion can do. All I did right here is I used the lens that it came with, and then it came with right here, and then I used my macro lens. The way that a phone or any other piece of software corrects for distortion is they do it digitally, meaning they take the image and then they understand, they have a chip inside of there that tells them what the distortion was, and they stretch the image out. And that has hard limits, very hard limits, especially for our purposes. You can't stretch information you don't have. This and many other less obvious distortions are especially noticeable at higher apertures. So when you get into the kind of apertures that we're using, at 22 and plus, then yeah, definitely the distortions become more profound. But again, this lens has the least amount of anybody. This is what I'm talking about. This is what I got with my zoom lens here. Okay, I got a flat spot right there. We have an entire feature here that it was not captured. There's no amount of stretching that will make up the information for the light that didn't reach the sensor. And that's the difference between the lens. That's what the lens can do, is it can actually capture proportion, actual information. So there's no amount of digital AI that can make that up. So that's why a DSLR is still, a real camera is still far from being replaced by a phone camera. This is what our consistency and true to life principles tell us. So this is a good example. You know, I didn't take this photo, the doctor did, and we were thrilled to see it. Don't get me wrong. It's nice to see when you nail a shade. But to kind of show you the difference, this is the same mouth. This one was taken with my macro lens, and then that was taken by the doctor. This is great for looking at that tooth's shade. And it's great for making us feel really great about, you know, the work that we did for the patient. But we can't critique our work. We can't grow from this photo. We have no idea what that tooth looks like next to that one. We can't properly gauge the embrasure here versus the embrasure there. Width and length are all distorted. So for purposes of bettering ourselves as technicians, this doesn't do much for us. Again, take photos. Doesn't matter if you don't have the right photo or anything like that. But understand what the limitations of those photos can do. If you're trying to make your technician feel good about a great match, this photo's great. If you're trying to help them get better, this one has its limits. So, phone versus DSLR. It comes down, if anybody here is a car guy, you could do all kinds of stuff to a 4-cylinder, but at the end of the day, cubic centimeters matters, right? And it's the same thing with photography and light. The average sensor size for a full sensor DSLR is 24 millimeters by 36 millimeters. And for a phone, it's 4 by 6. You can't get around that. You could pack more pixels into there, But if you'll notice, some of the latest, most expensive Canon photos have the same number of pixels as my phone. It's because more pixels doesn't make it more better. Larger pixels are more sensitive. And there's a lot more to these attributes than what's being sold on a phone. And so it also has a hard limit with the lens itself. There's a single element, the magnetic element in any given phone that allows you to focus in and out. This has several elements that allows you to focus in and out in a smooth bokeh. And everything else is just manufactured with AI, whereas this with the optically correct. What we're looking at is we're looking at digitally corrected or optically correct. Okay, that's the difference. Now, full frame versus crop sensor. This is, I have a ton of information about why you want to have a full frame sensor. I don't. So it's possible. If you have one of these cameras already, don't feel like, oh, I can't use this camera. No, it just makes your life a little bit harder. You have to stand back a little further when it comes to doing portraits and stuff like that. One of the things that people are going to tell you that's completely misleading is that, like, well, if you have a crop sensor, then you have that extra magnification. I suppose if you think magnification has nothing to do with optics, then yeah, it does. It crops it for you. So it just gives you less frame, and it gives you no more resolution like an optical zoom would actually do, but it makes a smaller frame. And when our purpose is just means you have to stand further back. I find that when you're looking at stuff like, well, do I have the space for photography, that matters. There's a ton of reasons why those are great. So when you have the right kind of space, you can take awesome kinds of photos. Now, I really like this photo. This is of Becky again. And I just couldn't take a bad photo of her once I had the studio light set up. This is actually the first person I used with these lights. And it seems kind of intimidating to have these, but it's not a bad setup. So critical settings. Those are our critical pieces of equipment, okay? And the critical settings. Now, first of all, the camera it can be easily intimidating, okay? There's all these buttons, dials, and switches. Acronyms almost entirely covering your DSLR. It's no wonder that it can start to feel like a Rubik's Cube that's covered in hieroglyphics that when carefully arranged can open a portal of some kind. There's a lot going on there. But I understand that that's because like these cameras aren't made just for dentists. A lot of times you need to have things at the ready. You need to have buttons quickly to be able to adjust settings and stuff like that. That's not for our purposes. And when we realize, though, that not every great technological photography advancement is made with dentistry in mind, then we actually can start simplifying things greatly. We're not in a stadium with a mix of synthetic and natural light. We're not capturing peak athletic moments with a perfect balance of still and motion blur and compelling bokeh. We don't have to worry about that. But by the way, I want to say this is the only slide where I use AI. So, yeah. I didn't actually take those photos. As dental photographers, our environment is knowable and controllable. Our techniques can be standardized and be repeated. And with practice, it can be very efficient. All right. So to capitalize on this is why we shoot in manual. Okay. And I know that there's lots of guides out there. There's lots of classes that some of you paid a lot of money for that will argue with me on this. But here's my reasoning. I'm not going to read this. But you're more than welcome to read it for you. Basically, why would you limp with a cane when you're fully capable of running? There's zero reason to use any of the priority modes. We don't change those settings ever, so there's no reason to have them. We change aperture once, and that can be done very easily. Manual has so many added benefits to shutting off so many other settings that are screwing with your raw data that, like, I would say that there's a good reason why you have to shoot in manual. Now, the next point I'm going to make is about shooting in RAW. Raw image data is what we need in order to use a white balance card. In order to color correct, you need raw images. Not only that, raw images are unaffected by so many other things that your camera is trying to do to your images. When you give us raw data, then we know where our baseline is and we can start from there. Especially if you can ask your lab, do you know how to take raw files? How do I submit them? Then they can trust a lot more. They can see what settings you use and everything else. They can even give you some feedback if you're trying to improve your photography. But the point is it hasn't been compressed. Now, compression is one of those things that is fine and necessary. It's because these raw files are huge. Not a whole lot of pieces of software can use them. So you're going to have to make them into JPEGs eventually. But how that's done and what's done to the data before that's done is very important. Your camera will affect many settings. So shoot in RAW. That's what's going to give us our consistent and true to life principles. If you absolutely have to have JPEGs, that's great. No front, that's fine. They have a setting on there called RAW plus JPEGs, where it essentially takes 2 images. And you can use your JPEGs however you want to use them there in your practice, and show your, turn around and show your patient whatever it is, and then you can send the raw data over to your lab and again, ask them and they'll tell you how to submit that stuff. So our guiding principles of consistency, true to life, show us that we need to have this equipment. We need to have a white balance reference card. We need to have the space. We need to have a true macro lens, and we need to have a DSLR with a full frame sensor. All of these will form the center upon which you buy all of your other equipment. And in that same sense, we've learned that you have to shoot in RAW and we have to use manual. That will form the basis around all of the settings. And what we need to know is, well, what do we need to know? Right? We need to understand what the limit of what our understanding needs to be is. So I did the research on my own camera, and I'm going to really kind of bust through these because, yeah, I'm doing pretty good at time. But I'm not going to hang on each of these settings, but it is all of my settings for my camera. And if you did take photos of these, then you'd be able to replicate this. Now, I really encourage you to do your own research on your own camera, because it could be different. But at the end of the day, what I'm doing is I'm asking myself a pretty simple question. Does this affect the raw image data? And if it does, how do I turn it off? And if it doesn't affect it, well, what else does it do? And sometimes I can't turn it off, and that leads to more questions, of course, as well. But that's the big one. So this is all the other settings and all the other equipment. Shifting and bracketing, okay? You don't want to use it. Basically, it's used for HDR, high dynamic ranges and stuff like that. You're taking a number of photos, you're combining them later in post or on the camera itself. It's not for our purposes. You can ignore it, turn it off. White balance and shift bracketing is just another kind of bracketing. And it needs to be turned off, I believe, because it will alter the raw image data by changing the pixel data itself. So this is an important one to make sure is off if you want to correct for things. It's great if, again, you're using white balance, shifting, bracketing because you're in a stadium or something like that. But for our purposes, it does nothing but hinder and make things more complicated. The auto exposure bracketing is much the same thing. It compromises our true to life principles. Go ahead and turn it off by setting it, by keeping it at 0. Now, picture styles, you have to pick one. So pick the neutral one. That's the one that's going to be changing things the least. Picture styles will affect the color of things. And even when you bring it into Lightroom, it defaults to its own picture style. And you can see it here. This is this is my dad, actually. Not only do we have 2 different colors, this one's in camera neutral, and then this one is in Adobe color. Not only is it changing there, but the histogram itself is changing as well. So it does change things. So make sure that you're keeping that on camera neutral, and then if you're using post software, that you put that at camera neutral as well. The in-camera lens correction, I mean, you can use this, you can not use this. If you're using RAW plus JPEG, and you want to correct for the slight aberrations that this lens has, there's a chip in there, and when it produces an image on the viewfinder, it'll tell you what it looks like with all those distortions corrected. It won't affect the raw data. The raw data is not going to have that. That's something that I have to do in post, real quick, just a couple of buttons. So if you want to keep it on, you can keep it on. I keep it off because I don't use RAW plus JPEG. Auto lighting optimizer. Yeah, you want to turn this one off. The white balance, use flash. Oh, sorry. Is anybody? Okay, good. For the white balance, use the flash setting. Don't use the white balance setting. Again, the custom balance thing is much better handled with a card and in post. The red eye reduction, keep that one on because it actually, the way that this works, like I said, the human eye pupil is so fast in reacting that it actually shoots a pre-flash and it constricts the pupil, and that's how red eye reduction works. It's half biological. It has nothing to do with any kind of digital correction or anything like that, so it won't affect the raw images, and it is useful not to have to deal with red eye. Aspect ratio, this is the same concept as a digital crop, okay? Or a crop sensor, somebody trying to tell you that it helps you zoom in. It doesn't. Your sensor is 3.2. Use your whole sensor. So use 3.2, okay? If you want to crop it later, you can. And that's better handled in post anyways. The autofocus method. So later on, I'm going to show you some techniques as far as like taking portraits and stuff, or taking mouth shots and taking intraoral shots. And this is going to be one of those necessary settings. You need to be able to have a frame that's focusing on a different part other than the center at some point. Autofocus metering mode. This is consequential and it's not. We're not using metering of any kind, so we don't have to have that. Now with the white balance card that I use, there's a little circle on it that helps me to kind of get my distance. And so I use the, what is it, evaluative? Spot. There we go. I use the spot metering because it makes a little circle in the middle of the frame that I can line up with on that card. So, but other than that, it's pretty inconsequential. You do have to select one though, so use spot, I guess. The histogram. Set the histogram on your camera to brightness. You don't need to have a breakdown of RGB. It does you no good. I don't know how to use it or understand it, but this will tell you whether you've lost data or not. Okay, just to kind of demystify the histogram a little bit. What we have here is we have a sheet of paper that's half white and half black. I took three photos. On the first photo, we have nothing but white. So the entire data is moved all the way to the right. This is white, okay? And on the next one, I did half and half. And on the last one, I did nothing but black, and it's all the way to the left. Now, what's important to remember is that as we see a histogram, it's going to be a crazy kind of graph. Most of it needs to kind of land in the middle here. And importantly, if you see this spike, it's going off the page like that, then you've lost data. And that's not recoverable. It's so washed out or it's so blacked out that we can't see that information. And that can really hinder when it comes to shades. And so we have special ways of tackling that later on. Okay, so a couple of idiot-proof functions. This one's amazing. Those dials and switches are very sensitive. And you'll brush up against them and all of a sudden you go from F22 to F32 and then somehow you're back at F14. Well, there's a lock there that locks all that in place and it's very useful. So I would really highly encourage using it. And the next one is the memory card. There's a setting that will allow you, it won't let you take a picture if you don't have a memory card in. Don't do a whole photo shoot to realize the memory card wasn't in. So I say, there's a setting, it's called, the default is this setting is always on. And then you can turn it off. Don't turn it off. So keep that on. So now we're going to get into some kind of equipment. So the ring flash. Okay, now the ring flash has a lot of strengths and weaknesses, but this is the flash I'm going to tell you that you got to get. This is the one that will serve all of your purposes indefinitely if you never want to move any further. If you're going to go into the dual flash, you need to graduate to the dual flash. The ring light has really close proximity to the lens. It's very consistent. And it's very knowable, and it lends very well to the cross-polarization or even floral filters that are coming out too, that we can use to analyze colors in dentistry. So I would say definitely start with your ring light. That being said, dual flash can do things that the ring light just can't do. So I love my dual flash. It really changed the game. Part of my drive for photography is the fact that like I'm not seeing on the picture what I see here. I see a beautiful, fine, subtle contours, but I can't capture them. And it wasn't until I really started realizing that it has nothing to do with settings, it has everything to do with light. And having a couple of bouncers and a dual flash really makes a big difference, okay? And I use a pretty standard set for that. I would like to get the Canon version, but this one serves my purposes just fine. And here's the difference that I'm talking about. This is the ring light. It does a great job for shade communication. You can see all kinds of details, but everything is rather flat. And when you come with a dual flash, you get textures on the tissue and on the buccal surface that you just couldn't capture before. Now, one of the downsides of having a dual flash like this is that shadows can become a problem, especially when it comes to intraoral shots and stuff like that. But when it comes to things like portraits or when it comes to capturing just pictures of the teeth extra orally, then yeah, the dual flash does things that the other one can't. Just understand the difference of it. And if you have to choose only one, get the ring flash. All right, so then there's the portrait flash. So For a long time, I used this horseshoe flash that goes on there, and that kind of requires a bouncer. If you don't have a bouncer, then you have very harsh lines on the face that can be rather distracting, especially when you're trying to measure things and trying to come up with what shape of teeth are really going to make this face, belong there. And so the bouncer reflects the light back off and kind of helps to eliminate shadows. And you can also see proportions better too. So having nice, even light is important. And also because I have a crop sensor, I have to sit farther back. So even at full blast, every one of my portraits was always underexposed, which is fine. I had a white balance card. I could bring up the exposure in post. Nothing was lost. But it wasn't ideal. And I wasn't capturing, again, what I'm seeing with the results or with the lack thereof. And so I upgraded to these. Again, if you have the space, then absolutely you should use it. Now, we have a window to the right, and that means that I don't like to have my aperture all the way down to f-stop 11, because to me that lets in too much ambient light. If I have the f-stop 22, now it cancels out so much of the ambient light that's around it. It almost doesn't matter where they're at. They could be anywhere. As long as I have that white card balance in there, and I know I can bring it into true color. So there's a number of things you can do though if you do want to use a lower aperture, and there's advantages to that. And you can install a dimmer, you can put in blackout shades and stuff like that too. This cost me $700. It doesn't break the bank, and it's a world of difference. It's like night and day. Not only is studio lighting more flattering, it's also more lifelike. This is just me. And this is real. And lighting makes a big difference, especially if you're trying to get a patient on board with a before and after that then you can show to other patients, a before and after that then you can show to even using for advertising, fulfilling other purposes of this. That was weird. Then making sure that they know that not every single pore is going to be blaring at you, right? And that oh no, actually you don't have bad wrinkles. This is just bringing them out to a degree that you'll never see. And so when people are unhappy with their teeth, one of the things that you can always say to anybody that walks in the door that they're unhappy with their teeth, and it's like, have you tried standing further from the mirror? Kind of thing, right? So sometimes that's a real good cure, but most of the time that's not what you're going for, right? So I go into a lot of other settings. So this is the flash setting. Just use manual. It's pretty straightforward, pretty easy. This is what it looks like on any given flash system. There's all kinds of things on there. Manual simplifies it. You don't need to worry about zoom necessarily. You can if it's on there. You don't need to worry about a lot of the automations either. It really simplifies things when you're using manual. Batteries are a real thing. Use fresh batteries every time. There's a little light that turns on and off, lets you know it's fully charged, it's ready to fire. It lies. I've found from a series of photos that I know I waited for each time for that light to go off, and it's a different exposure each time. And so I'd say that's if the battery is starting to slow down and your flash is starting to take a little while to charge back up, just have fresh batteries. I have these recommendations right here. It's the Panasonic N-Loop Pro. I've gone through a few different kinds of rechargeable batteries, and these ones are the best ones. Now, rechargeable batteries are always going to have less output, but I just don't want to do that to the planet, I guess, because I go through too many batteries. So it'll tell you use these disposable batteries. But anymore, a lot of flashes are coming with their own rechargeable batteries. Buy a second one, keep it in the charger. It will stop charging. It has a stop on it now. And so that way you can constantly cycle through. You're never worrying about batteries. And it's a bigger problem than you realize. So just to recap everything, okay? This is before we get into the techniques. We're getting more and more into the meat of things as we go, all right? So just a quick recap. These are our fundamentals. These are our critical equipment. These are our critical settings. Here's all the other settings we covered. Here's all the equipment we've covered. We're going to get into a few of these here soon. I didn't mention it out loud, but throughout the slides there was a black background, and there's bouncers and stuff like that as well. So techniques. But first, enamel dehydration. This is one of the most common things that I see all the time. We get from really good doctors, from really best intentions of everything, is that they take the shade shots after the procedure. There is a ton of studies, and I believe I brought some with me. If you can meet me at the booth, I can share it with you. There's a ton of studies that go so far as to say 2 minutes of dehydration can take up to 24 hours, and it gets worse from there as well for a matchable shade. If you are using a really good lab that's not cheap, and you're not getting the matches that you expect, this could be a thing that you're doing wrong as well. Really get those shades beforehand. Use rehydrated. And when you're doing these intraoral shots, like no more than 2 minutes before you take a break, and let them rehydrate things. And let them rehydrate things for a little while. They give their lips a break and stuff. But this is really important. We see it all the time. My dad has been a technician for nearly 40 years and requested that I repeat this throughout the slide. So, this is the beginning of the techniques of any given thing. So the first shot that you're going to take, whether it's a portrait, whether it's a face shot or a mouth shot or anything else, it's going to be with that white balance card. And then again, you'll see that again. So if you have glare on the card, retake the shot, okay? You don't want to match the glare, you want the gray, okay? Some of these white balance cards have a non-reflective property to them, some of them don't. But either way, that is gray. Keep in mind also that these cards can be, they can go out of date and you have to replace them. So they're affected by UV. Now, I use autofocus for the first shot and then I turn it off. And the reason why I do that is because it kind of locks it in. If the patient goes in and out of focus, that's because either they moved or I moved. I want to keep the same distance the entire time. Once I take that white balance card shot, I want to keep the same distance the entire series. And if I change that, then I know that, like, well, it appears as it's not in focus anymore. That means I need to move closer or farther away. So that's a technique that I highly recommend. It's worked very well for me over the years. These are the settings that you use for a horseshoe flash for portraits. These are the settings that you use for studio lighting for portraits. Here's some suggestions for a pre-check list. These are the things that I try to do every single time. A big one is to not have lipstick. It's a pain in the butt to deal with. And make sure that you're not matching breakfast. You're not catching, a piece of spinach and stuff like that. Obviously, if you're doing things for shade matching, it's great if they've had a cleaning in the last 6 years. That way we're not matching the plaque. And if you're really trying to nail down a compelling before and after, then have a printout of the befores when you're doing the afters. So you can really get the same angulation. The more similar you can make the afters, the less distraction it's going to be for the work that you've done. So these are just some more advices for the technique. With every shot, with all 5 angles set, so every set has 3 shots, smiling, a repose, and a mouth closed. And the reason why that is because then we can see how the lips are acting throughout that length or throughout that shape of the tooth. And then you want to have it at the 3 angles. Now, there's all kinds of ways that technicians use these information. You can meet us at the booth, and someone who knows a little, even more than I do about that stuff will be happy to answer those questions. So you want to capture the whole face. You can just go through the list here, and it'll give you a step-by-step on how to take really good portrait shots. So there's the befores. Here's an example of the entire set that we've taken, okay? And again, this is Becky. I want to give that credit where it's due. And there's the afters. Mouth shots. We're going to do the same things. Here's the settings for the extra oral mouth shots. It means outside of the, kind of farther away. No, you're not getting mirrors. You're not putting anything in the mouth, I guess, is what I'm saying. So this is the pre-check list. Again, it's got a few things that's copied and pasted. Number 1 is going to be keep the enamel hydrated. Okay, that's just going to be repeated over and over again. And then there's some suggestions for the patient. Again, have a printout if you want to have some compelling shots. And then here's some techniques. Again, there's that first shot with the white balance. Now, notice where the focus is on this, is I'm kind of selecting one that sometimes kind of lands a little bit outside of that, okay? This one isn't nearly as important. You do have some kind of some freedom to go one thing or another, but what's important is that you have a way of doing it, and you have an SOP. I'm ex-military, love SOPs. Here's the before set, what that looks like. You can see that her repose is not showing almost any teeth, and that's what we have at the end. So we do have quite a bit of gain in length there. And there's the befores, and there's the afters. Now the compelling thing is it's the same color of lipstick. She might have a little bit more of a tan, but for the most part, that's the same skin tone. And the difference between the teeth really pops at you, and it's less distracting. And also for evaluative purposes, for a technician who's trying to evaluate his work and what he's done, this is great. We can really look at the length, we can look at the embrasures, we can do all the comparison that we need. So portfolio shots for the intraoral shots. So mirrors and all that kind of fun stuff and retractors. So obviously we need some equipment. Get good mirrors. If you're going to spend money on anything here, it would be the mirrors. Get something that doesn't have that second layer to it that like gives you kind of almost a halo around the reflection, and big fat round edges so it's not cutting and jutting into the patient's mouth and cheek. Get a lip fork as well. That really helps out a lot. And I'll kind of walk through. Again, it's a checklist. So I would say take a picture if you're interested in getting these things. Again, it's not anything that isn't available on the internet, but this is exactly what I do. This is my SOP. Okay. Obviously, for the full retractor shot, that's the piece of equipment that you need. For the occlusal shots, this is the equipment that you need, and don't be afraid to get the patient involved sometimes. If you're trying to get that shot, that lip fork comes into play right here, is to kind of like drag it off of the buccal of the anterior teeth. When you're using the white balance card, make sure that you're placing the card against the teeth, not the mirror. And then from there, take the rest of your shots. This one is the toughest one when it comes to fogging. Have some device that helps you to eliminate fogging, or just use hot water like I do. And then for the anterior shots, again, don't be afraid to get the patient involved. Now for these, in order for patient comfort, I just took a pair of retractors and I shaved off, and I made them a half retractors. Because it's a patient comfort thing. You know, that way I can quickly get that shot. Also, it allows me to get shots more and more often with a contraster, which comes into play later on once we get into the cross-polarization and contrasting side of things. So here is Becky's before case. Obviously, she has put things off, as many of us do when we're fully capable of taking care of everything any day. It just decided, just do it all at once. Do it all at once, and then things got to a certain state, and she was very happy to take care of it. And I know that she doesn't mind showing this, because what she gets from people is, well, why are you doing your teeth? They look beautiful. But they don't see this. They don't see the other ones. And she's like, no, there are things that are going wrong. There's chips, and there's some things going on back there that I want to fix. And those are the afters. And of course, we were able to take our time. We were able to do a perfect thing. Artists and professionals, and perfectionists, we all live within constraints. But it is good to see, well, what are you capable of without those restraints? What if you had all the time in the world and you really took your time and you can make kind of a perfect case out of something? And yeah, I'm really proud of this. I feel like, we really outdid ourselves with this case. I mean, we definitely added some length there, and the shape and the contours of this were very specific. We worked through several iterations of try-ins and mock-ups and stuff. And we can walk you through the entire case. It's on our booth. We have all the wax-ups and everything. And you'd be amazed what a couple of millimeters can do to just the shape of the entire face. When I was putting this particular photo together, I was kind of having a panicking moment of like, why is the face a different shape? Did I do something wrong? Did I use the right lens? I'm checking all of my settings, and I'm like, should I even be giving this presentation if I can't, if I'm messing up the shape of the face? And whereas my technician walked in and said like, oh wow, yeah, wow, she's gonna be thrilled. She sees this, and I'm like, well, I'm not thrilled about it. It's like, why? I was like, well, because it's a different shape. It's like, well, yeah, we added 2 millimeters there. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. And it is astounding what kind of a change can happen from the work that we do. And 2 millimeters is not much. And yet it did everything she wanted. So goals met. All right, now we're getting into lab communication. But first, this is a technician's perspective on befores and afters. All right, we need befores and afters too. Okay, we can exist in a vacuum. One of the reasons why you use a technician instead of maybe using your CEREC is because, well, these guys do this kind of thing all the time, and I do this kind of thing once in a while. I'm going to give it to the professional, the specialist. It's the way that we treat a lot of medicine. There's a specialist in this. We're going to have these guys do it. But we exist a little bit in a vacuum sometimes when we never see the results of things. One of the biggest things that I know for a fact has elevated the work of my dad in the last 7 years, assuming that, oh yeah, I've kind of plateaued, I've kind of settled into how good I can be. Just seeing the results and self-critiquing, just the natural, nobody telling him exactly what to critique or anything else, just by the very natural process of seeing how his work was looking in the mouth, it elevated his work. And so I want to say probably learning this skill set and sharing it with a technician will set you apart as a dentist. No professional can improve on praise alone. It's great to have those photos that make us feel great about ourselves. I'm not going to say don't send those. Again, take pictures. But us being able to really evaluate what we've done from our own standards, and then all we have from you is what you liked about it, and maybe what could have been done better. There's going to be some critique. This guy hates seeing everything he's done every time, and now he has to see it in front of all of you. But anybody who has an eye for improvement does, and so he's seen these things often. I have printouts of his work, and it's made a huge difference. You can fire up the feeling of collaboration with the dental technician. If you feel like there's a disconnect between you and the technician, then sending photos, taking the time. Technicians, we all know how hard it is to take a good picture, especially if you've been around here long enough. And someone taking the time to use the contraster and the retractor and to take these shots. And by taking the time, I mean less than a minute in some cases. It speaks volumes to them, and they can do so much, and then I feel like, okay, this guy's a partner for me. And when their name comes across the bench, your name's just going to pop at them more. So if you want to improve, you want to make yourself stand out to your technician, maybe it's a big lab or whatever it is, then good photographs can definitely help you do that. At the end, I really want to mention, you might be underestimating a key member of your restorative team when you provide them with the tools necessary to improve. You would be really amazed at what they can do with that. And understanding what a good picture is versus a bad picture. Understanding that I took this picture and I didn't do this and that, so my expectations for what they can use it for should be limited. It's just like any other aspects of dentistry. You need to practice this and you need to put forward, and the fruits of those labors will definitely come forward, at least from our perspective. I know for a fact. I know from experience. So shots to include every time. Anytime you want if you want an aesthetic result, then take these shots, send them to us, because it goes a long way. Smile design shots. So smile design shots are tough because you have to take 2 shots. First of all, in NHD, natural head position, and then they can't move between taking off the retractors. Okay, and it's a real trick. There's all kinds of solutions to this. If you're familiar with coist, there's these glasses with bubbles that you can use. I've tried those. And sometimes they create more of a kind of a situation than they solve. But if you go to the ExoCAD user manual, they recommend the tissue box technique, which I've found actually works quite well. So here's Becky she's suspending a tissue box back behind her head. So obviously when you're going to remove retractors, there's a lot of movement. A lot of people like to remove the retractors with their head and keep their hands in place, and that's exactly what you don't want. And when you have a tissue box right there, it kind of cancels out and eliminates that tendency to do that. Also using double-sided retractors, 2 of them instead of the single one, because it's a lot easier to take out one at a time. okay? So you're gonna take this shot, and then you're gonna have them hold it up, all right? That way the shoulders don't drop, moving the head again, okay? And the result, if you look at the picture here, right here. Come on. There we go. It's pretty good. That is usable. Now we can line things up with this shot on the 2D scan and everything, and then we can draw the lines that we need to draw, and then we can see clearly what it's going to look like when she's smiling, right? So we can do all the technical aspects of length and width and all that kind of stuff, and then we can give it that artistic and personal touch with this photo. Color communication. Everybody wants to know about color communication. What else is there to say about color communication, right? Well, first of all, take notes. Like photos can say 1,000 words, obviously. They don't replace words, though. Like, we take notes. This is an example of the notes that we took so that one person can take the shade and another person can color it. And this guided them right into this. Especially when you have a nice, fluid, collaborative relationship with the technician, then you start to tailor those notes more and more. So take notes. Draw a picture. It helps. The shot preclusions, obviously we have to hit on the dehydration thing again. I know that's here somewhere. Always take shade photos prior to any procedure. If you've done a procedure where there was air blowing on the adjacent teeth for the last 30 minutes and they're completely dry, you really need to lower your expectations for any kind of a match at that point, if you haven't already done the match. And if that's a problem that's been reoccurring regardless of what lab you send it to or anything like that, this is definitely something to look into. Again, I've got some research if you need to look at it, but it does change the texture. It changes the way that light reflects off of it. It changes almost everything there is to say about a tooth color when it's dehydrated. It's very important. We want to match the tooth, not the plaque. Again, so kind of being within reason of when things have been cleaned. Ensure reasonably healthy gum tissue, so again, that's not too distracting. And then it goes on and on and on. All right, we're going to get into some cool stuff here. I prefer the 3D Shade Master. And then here's the 4 shade shots. Notice how this is the tooth to be matched. That's the tooth. This is the tooth to be matched. That's the tooth to be matched. That's the tooth to be matched. That is the tooth we're replacing. And it seems straightforward, but that's another big constant mistake that we see is they're covering up the shade. They're covering up the tooth that we're trying to match. And they're showing us the tooth they're about to take away. Which isn't as nearly as useful sometimes. Or they're showing us the temporary. Angulation's a thing, so if you're trying to get things dead on, if the reflection is in the middle, then you're dead on. If it's up towards the top, that means that you're superior. If it's towards the bottom, that means you're inferior, which leads to glare. You're gonna have glare. What do we do with this? In fact, this is Becky. This is her teeth. There's a whole section here. We have no idea what's going on right there. A lot of times, something like this is caused by a depression, some kind of a mark. And if we're gonna be doing a match of any kind in a situation like this, then we need to know what's behind there. Obviously. Well, there's a way of handling that. First of all, understanding what glare is. Now, there's 2 properties of light that we understand. When you take paint and you mix it all together, you get black. That's called subtractive. When you take light and you add it all together, you get white. It's called additive. So what happens with glare is you have all these multiple different kinds of wavelengths of lights that are crashing into each other. And when they crash into each other, they create a white glare. That's why all glare is white. That information is lost. On the histogram, you can see that. And I went ahead and set my Lightroom up to kind of show in red where all of those spots of lost information are. And again, obviously we have it right here. So I have a little visual right here, and I talk about it. And then I've got this little Lego guy. So one of my technicians had this little Lego guy on there. I wanted to show you what a dramatic effect it is with glare. So I picked it up. I put a mirror behind it, and you can see my ring flash. This is a lot of glare. It's pure glare. And I wanted to cross-polarize it. So cross-polarization, I have an example right here. We have a filter. It's filtering the light as it leaves the flash, and it's filtering it again as it goes back into the lens and strikes the sensor. And when it leaves the light, it's instead of it coming out all messy, it's coming out in nice little lines here. And when it comes back, obviously, now it's a little bit more jumbled up. There's some glare that's still there. Anybody here fishing, you got the polarized glasses on, you still see some glare, right? Because one filter won't do it. So then it goes through again. Now this filter is set at 90 degrees to the other filter. That's why it's called cross polarization. And it essentially eliminates all glare at that point. And what you end up with is something like this. I'm directly facing a mirror and my flash is at full blast. And I can clearly see every single detail without a bit of glare. And so that's the power of what this allows us to do with teeth is essentially, and here's some recommendations on how to get that white balance card. Essentially, it allows us to punch right through the enamel and see a very important aspect that from a remake and adjustment point of view is extremely important. Value, if you screw that up, it's a remake. It's a full-blown remake. It's not a thing that you can fix real quick and with the patient in a chair. And so cross-polarization is great for nailing that down. Now, there was something else I wanted to say. We have to white balance if you're going to use cross-polarization. The process of going through these filters changes the wavelengths of light to the degree that the color changes and the exposure changes. So if you're going to use cross-polarization, you have to use a white balance. It builds on itself. So now we have white balance. You know, we can see the value. What else can we do? With raw data sent to us, we can do contrasting exercises on this. Now, this is really great. Obviously, well, these are the same teeth again. So we're seeing completely different aspects of things. This is the color and the brightness that her teeth are at. This is very lifelike. This is not. I took the contrast and I bumped it way up. And I took the brightness and I kind of brought it down a bit. But what I'm able to see right now, though, is not only what all the individual features are, but where they begin and where they end. Exactly where they begin and where they end. I can see translucency, exactly where it begins and where it ends. I can see Dr. Catan's tool marks right up here. So when we have color corrected, cross-polarized, and it's got a contrast comparison, this is a powerful and profound image. But when we combine it with this, this is enough information for us to do any level of tough shades and do an amazing job. I know from experience that given raw photos, I can create these kinds of images and I can get a really good result. I want to say stump shades, really important and really neglected. We get big cases sometimes with no stump shades. Or we're given a stump shade, but not told that it's mostly amalgam. Pictures of stumps really go a long way. If you really want to nail it down, you can white balance it too, and you can hold up the shade tabs. We need to see these things if we're going to have a good result. Adjustments and remakes. So, the only thing worse than an adjustment or remake is two adjustments and remakes. The only thing worse than two adjustments and remakes is three adjustments or remakes. And we can end the cycle. And it's happened to everybody here, I'm sure, where whether for one reason or another, maybe it's one aspect that just can't get right. Maybe first aspect was color. Oh, now this next one's length. And then this next one's that one. The way to mitigate so much of this is to take those good photos that we talked about with the color correction and put the crown in place and tell us what's wrong. Of course, communicate all of that, but give us the opportunity to see other things we did wrong too and quietly correct that as well. And photography allows us to do that. Again, seeing the results of mistakes we make is just as important, if not more important, than the successes that we have as well. So good photography with the lab can really kind of help that. So more or less, that is my presentation. I hope that you guys learned a lot. I do have a couple of Easter eggs for you though. If you like this shot, I want to show you how I got it. Using the exact same settings. None of the settings have changed. F-stop 22, got shutter speed of 100, and they've got ISO of 125 and then an ISO of 100. And everything else is all the same. She's just holding the two different flashes at different angles. This is us just painting with light. Okay? This is us just playing with light. That's where you get these kinds of effects. Now, I didn't do a thing to this photo. It hit the viewfinder, just like this. And so I wanted to show what light can really do and the kind of compelling images you can get. And then when it comes to another shot, so this is Dr. Catant right here. He was looking through a book while we were doing the photo shoot, and he found a shot that he wanted to try and do. And so we discovered this other shot. If you put the light, one light beneath and then one light to the side, you can get quite compelling lighting situation as well. And again, this is the kind of photo that a patient can walk in and feel at ease that you're the one making their new smile. And or that this is the lab that you're using. Oh wow, this is okay, this is the kind of thing. And so for technicians to promote themselves, for doctors to promote themselves and to put the patient at ease, to get them to change their behavior, to get them to get on board fully so that these cases can be successful, photography is very essential. I want to wrap this up by just hitting on a few big points, okay? Regardless of what level of photography you are at right now, take photos. Practice dental photography the way you practice dentistry. And the worst photos are always the ones you don't send. Thank you.